Emma was one of our helpers. And so whether she was a helper or whether you donated supplies, whatever it is, I want to thank you for what you did to make VBS successful. Let me show you some of the things they did. Does anybody know what this is? What is this? What is this? This, my friends, is a washeroo. A washeroo. It is, they made about 50 of them as part of their projects. It's like a little kangaroo type thing, but inside it's a washcloth with some soap. It's meant to be given out to those in need, like the homeless, and it gives them a ready-to-go shower experience. So if they need some personal hygiene, our kids made them some washeroos, and we'll make sure that gets passed out to those who need it. And so we have about 50 in that box. So our kids were busy bees making their washeroos the last couple of days, but we had a lot of fun. We started out talking about how that God is always with us. Believe it, right? And then last night we talked about how much God loved us. We put together the mystery of his story of love from Jesus' birth all the way to his death, burial, and resurrection. And so we had an amazing time. So thank you for those that made that possible. We had a blast, and hopefully we can get some pictures up, put together shortly so that you can see them. One other announcement, as Joy prayed, we have our second mission trip we're about to leave on. So we leave early Tuesday morning. Some of us have to leave around, we'll hit the road around 4:35 in the morning to get to Charlotte. Some a little earlier. I'm sorry for my Greensboro folks who have to be at Greensboro by 4 o'clock because you have a 6 o'clock flight. Hey, it's the best we could find for you, but good luck to you. We'll see you in Billings, right? So we head out to Billings, Montana. We're going to get picked up, and we're going to be taken to Lewiston, Montana. Some have already left. They decided to travel by car, by camper, and so they're there waiting for us. They've already arrived, and so we're excited to see them. And what we're going to be doing is there is a Camp Lutana, and we're going to be assisting them doing some rebuilds, doing some construction work, clean up around the camp as they just ended their camp season, and they're going to get the camp ready for winter, because if you don't know, winters in Montana can be quite rough. And so we're going to get it ready for winter and do all the renovations they need, because they have a short window to get that done before winter rolls in, so that next year when spring thaws everything out and the kids start coming for camp, it's ready to go. So this is there's families going, there's the younger kids, the middle schoolers are going, so it's going to be quite the experience, but we are excited. At last count, we were looking at about 30 total people from the church. So we're sending a huge group. We're excited how that is going to play out. Now, I got pictures for you, but that comes up later. And when I was putting those pictures together, I was a silly boy and forgot to put this one up. So you're going to have to visualize it. But I need your help. An offer has come to us that it might be a little too good to say no to, but we'll need your help on this. It has come to our attention that there is a large school bus for sale, well maintained. It was previously owned by Sheets Memorial Church just down the road, and through different series of events, it is now up for sale, and they only want $1,500 for it. I think we can make that happen. So $1,500, if there's roughly about 100 to 200 people here, if there's 150, if everybody gave $10, we're there, right? Does that work? No, $100. No, wait, was $10 right the first time? Yes, 100 was. Look, it's early. I've already done one mission trip. I'm getting ready for the next one. Don't judge. After you hear my story today about what happened to us, you'll give me a little more leniency. Okay, no, I'm joking. But look, just chip something if you're able to. If you give online, just put special missions and put bus on there. If you're giving an envelope, just notate bus. You're giving by check, whatever it is. But just let us know if that's something you want to assist us with. And depending on what's left over after our Montana trip, I may need your help one more time, but you have been so supportive that we may not need it with what has been raised. But we want to be able to assist the Bonnie Floyd ministry team we just left. They had some needs crop up, and we want to be able to assist them, but I'll keep you posted depending on how things go on that. But hopefully, in a couple of weeks, we might get that bus to be driven here, and you guys can see firsthand what we're talking about. And so then we would have a van for short trips, taking people to the airport, going on little retreats, pulling our trailer, the church trailer for projects, and then we'll have a bus for when we do the big stuff, because typically when we do our retreats, we have to take many, many cars all the way to South Carolina, And next time, hopefully, we can just take our bus. And apparently, some of us can drive that we may not have known can drive because they were cheerleader people. I heard through the grapevine. Anyway, that's all I got. Let's go ahead and dive in. Today's going to be a little different because I know many of you are curious about what we went through the last week on our mission trip. All you know is that when we last left off, Eric was up here and he told you they may be stuck and they're out of gas, right? Well, let me explain what that means. We'll get to that shortly. And to say it was a whirlwind of a trip is an understatement. Now, since I'm not going to be here next week, and we'll have a special guest speaker again next week because I'll be in Montana, it's the mission season, I'm going to continue our pause on 1 Corinthians because it'd be weird to be 2 weeks off, 1 week 1 Corinthians, another week off. You might forget where we are, so we're going to continue our pause. And so instead today, I'm going to use it as a chance to do a recap of what we experienced in Barbuda on island. And frankly, I wanted to do it because we were able to go a lot in part because of your generous support. Many of you gave, whether it was materials or financially. And so it would be only fair to let you know what happened because of your support. And actually, we've talked about this before. This reporting of events is a biblical thing. Let me show you what I mean. In the book of Acts, we see it. Paul and Silas had just gone on their first missionary journey. And in Acts chapter 14, starting in verse 26, we read, "Finally they being Paul and Silas, returned by ship to Antioch of Syria, where their journey had begun. The believers there had entrusted them to the grace of God to do the work they now had completed. Upon arriving in Antioch, they called the church together and reported everything God had done through them and how he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles too, and they stayed there with the believers for a long time." We follow that up with Acts 15:4. When they arrived in Jerusalem, Barnabas and Paul were welcomed by the whole church, including the apostles and elders. They reported everything God had done through them. It's only natural that if the church supports and sends out, that we come back and give an account for it. So that's what we're going to do. We even talked about this 2 years ago in our journey through Acts, because when we got to this part in Acts, we had just got back from our very first Barbuda mission trip. And so today, not only do I want to tell you what happened, so you are able to share the experiences with us, I want to also leave you with the same takeaway that we left the island with. Because believe it or not, when you go on a mission trip, you are often more impacted than the people you are helping because God moves in and among us. And so we often leave with some kind of takeaway because we're so spiritually focused, which should be how we participate on a normal basis. But because daily life gets in the way, we often forget. But when you're so focused, you're able to see God. And so I want to give you the same takeaway we had about the power of God and his protection and his provision in our lives. And let me go ahead and tell you, yes, though we prayed for it, God still had other plans. For the third year in a row, our trip had a hurricane. I mean, come on. First year, September, I get it. Second year is October. I get it even more. This year, we said, fine, we'll go July, August. It happened again. What are the odds it happens a fourth year in a row? They have to be astronomical at this point, right? But we made it. We got back home safely. God kept us safe. And so we'll talk about that when the time comes in our recap. So let me tell you how it all began. As normal, we all gathered together well before any decent human being should be awake. Now, if you work third shift, we give you a pass on that. But it has come to my attention that some of you actually prefer that God-forsaken time before the sun's alarm has even gone off. When the sun itself is still in bed, you like to pop up and get up and you're like, happy morning, everybody. What is wrong with you, right? If the best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup and total darkness, then okay, maybe you were awake when we were. If not, cool, you're normal. And if you are that kind of person, we won't hate on you too much. Maybe God just wired you that way, right? But anywho, we were up really, really early. It's dark outside. Half of us were still asleep. And we started out by one of our elders meeting us there at my house, and we all huddled together. We talked about the week, what we were hoping to see God do, and then we started the week with prayer. Now, before all that happened, when my alarm went off, and I'm literally trying to stumble through getting ready, and I'm trying to shove enough caffeine in my system to help my system boot up, because it's kind of like stuck in sleep mode, and so I'm just cramming caffeine in until it kicks in. I was doing some praying, and I prayed over the week, and I wanted God to show us what he wanted us to focus on as we kicked off. And the verse that God brought to mind is the very same verse that started Community Church, Isaiah 43:19. And that goes like this: "For I'm about to do something new. See, I've already begun. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I'll create rivers in dry wasteland." In fact, this was a new trip for many. Our graduates and upper high school students had never been able to participate in the adult mission trip to Barbuda, and this was new for them. And for the first part of the week, that was the theme verse. We kept seeing new things crop up over and over. In fact, for instance, we rode in a brand new plane. Not American Airlines, that was normal. We landed, and normally we take a little 7-seater, and with the amount of people we have, we usually have to take 2 or 3 trips to get everybody over. Well, due to some scheduling issues, they borrowed a bigger airplane from a sister company. I mean, it was huge. It fit 15 people, right? Yeah, tiny little plane, just a little bit bigger, so we all were able to ride over in one trip, and so that was new. We got to share that experience. Those of us who have been several times before were able to talk to the people who had never been before, share the experience with them, flying over, seeing the water, saying it's okay. It sounds scary when it goes blum, 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 and you see it rattle. It is a little nerve-wracking to see the cracks in the airplane where they seal the door and you can still see the sunshine shining through, but we'll make it. Just hang tight, right? And so we got there and everything went smoothly. But starting day 1, we faced opposition all week long. Day after day, the enemy was attacking. Let me tell you how it first started. We landed in Antigua with American Airlines. We got our bags. We made it through customs and immigration. No big deal. Everything's going smoothly, and we go to the next airline, the little plane company that's going to take us to Ireland, and we get our tickets. We check our bags. Everything seems to be going according to plan. Charlotte now has resumed their direct flights to Antigua, so we haven't had a layover to get some lunch. So we're like, hey, we're here. We got 45 minutes. Everybody just... There's some restaurants in the terminal. Get you something to eat, go get a snack, hang out for a minute, take a load off, and then we'll gather when it's time and we'll board the tiny plane. Well, as soon as they got settled in the terminal and started ordering lunch, a page went out over the terminal intercoms that our flight was boarding 45 minutes early. And when they board, it's not like, oh, it's boarding, and for the next 40 minutes we'll be boarding. No, it's like, you got a few minutes and then we're leaving. And so we had to mad dash scramble. Some of us had paid for our lunch and it still was being cooked, and we had to say bye and leave it in the chef's hands and never to see it again, because we had to scramble. So those of us who were at a point where we could go, we ran to the gate, we stalled them, hey, hold up, we're coming, we're gathering them, and we just kind of talked to them enough to not leave yet until everybody could gather. And so thankfully God helped us hold tight until we got everybody together. And we were able to fly over, and nobody got left behind. And so we ended that day like we do every day when we're on island, with reflections. You see, while we're having a trip, we have 2 things. We wake up in the morning, we start with devotions, and we end the evening with something we call reflections. It is when we look at the day, we reflect on the day we just experienced, and we try to see where we saw God moving, and we share it with each other. And so let me pause for a moment in my recap. I don't want to challenge you, give you a little mini challenge. Start trying to do that yourself. End your day wrapping up by reflecting on where you saw God in your life. And it might be hard at first because you're like, well, it's just a normal day. I got up, ate some toast, went to work, came home, ate some dinner, watched a little TV, and then went to bed. But if you really start focusing, and the more you do it, the easier it becomes, you start to see the little things that are nuanced in our lives where God is actually working, where we can give God glory, and you'll be surprised the more you look how much you actually will see God moving in your day-to-day. In fact, there's a verse that I want to talk about a little bit later today that came into play during our week. And in that verse, what it does is it first tells us to bring everything in prayer to God. But after that, it says, and thank him for what he has done. You see, that's what we should be doing on a daily basis. We should be thinking, we should be aware, we should be focused on the things of God. You see, God doesn't slumber, God doesn't take vacation, He's not on a break. He is always working and He's constantly moving in our lives because He is sovereign and everything in the world moves according to His will. And so the more we become aware of this, the more thankful we find ourselves becoming because we can actually name the things we're seeing. And then when they start to pile up, we kind of become more and more grateful when we see how much He is doing on our behalf. But more on that in a little bit. So let's continue our recap. Day 2, we started with church. Normally we don't arrive on a Sunday, but the way our schedule worked best, we arrived on a Sunday, and so we start every Sunday with church. And so we went to their church, and it was an interesting experience because they worship a little different than us. But we still had church. We had a good time, wonderful message, and then we ended the day with a relaxing time at the beach. Now, let me talk about church for a second. It's nice to show up the third year in a row and still be welcomed like friends and family and not like strangers. These are people over 2,000 miles away, separated by ocean, that worship the same God that we do. They are part of the same capital C church, because how many churches are there in the world? One church, one body of Christ, right? We are all the family of God. And so we find a group of believers, even though we're separated by time and space, we still are united through our same worship of the same living God. You see, Ephesians 4, starting in verse 4, tells us, "For there is one body," that's the church, "and one Spirit, just as you have been called to one glorious hope for the future. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and in all and living through all." And so what we were able to see is, though some of these people we've never met before, we instantly have a shared connection because we all love the same God. And so that's a really, really neat experience if you've never been to another part of the world to meet fellow believers, to find that even though there's cultural and language barriers, when it comes to God, you are still united. And so we ended the day with the beach. And you would think that it would be easy to forget God, right? It's beach time. We're going to eat some lobster. We're going to go snorkeling. We're going to play in the water. Forget this God thing. Well, church was great. What are you talking about? I don't know, but we're eating lobster. It's great. No, we didn't have that experience that you would assume that was going to happen. And thankfully, we didn't send any pictures over beforehand because many of you followed along with social media. And if you saw immediately that we're hanging on the beach, you might be like, I thought we helped support a mission trip, not a Caribbean beach vacation. But that's just how their schedule works. Every Sunday is church, then beach. And so we got it out of the way right away. But what we found is when we reflected that night, many people started talking about how even at the beach they saw God and they were sincere with it. Many of them actually had prayed prayers. They were searching, they were wrestling with some stuff with God. And so asking for signs or help them to see something new. And so they approached even a beach day through a spiritual lens, and God answered their prayers. And they discovered things in like just something as simple as sea life and something they'd never seen before, and it pushed them out past their worries of going out that far to see it. It pushed them past their fears of not being able to swim well. And they stretched their boundaries, and as a result, they saw God and they saw His creation from a new angle, and it strengthened and deepened their faith on a beach day. But it happened. Well, that was Sunday. We go into Monday, and now it is time for the real work to begin. And we start every morning at 6 a.m. with devotions. That means you have to get up, brush your teeth if you're going to do that. I hope you did because it's stinky otherwise. Get up, brush your teeth, and be ready to roll by 6 o'clock because we do devotions. And as soon as devotion's over, we eat breakfast and hit the road. So we don't have time to get ready. So we get up early and we start the day with devotions. And so the week kicked off there. And so we had a project, and we started out, instead of splitting up, a project that all of us could work on together. And what we were doing is finishing a lady named Charmin, and we were working on her house. For those who have been before, you know of Charmin. For those who have not been, let me tell you about Charmin. Can we get picture 1, please? This is Emma. Sorry to use you, Emma, but it was the best picture I had. And she is painting Charmin's house. Let me tell you a little bit about Charmin. Charmin is a wonderful, peaceful lady that goes to the same church that we attend while we're on the island. You see, Charmin and her family survived Hurricane Irma in 2017, and they rode it out. And when the hurricane was about to hit island, Sharman started praying because she knew it was a Category 5 and this is super dangerous, but they were already on island. And she prayed, God, she didn't pray, God, don't blow away my house. God, don't wreck my stuff. No, all she said is, God, let there be no loss of life. Over my family, God, let there be no loss of life. And it was a near thing too, because in the middle of the hurricane at the hardest peak, her roof started to rip off and it actually sucked her up. Her and her refrigerator at the same time, because the winds were so strong, it created a vacuum. And she was lifted up off the ground with her refrigerator, but thankfully the refrigerator went first, and it blocked the hole, so she was not pulled out of her roof. After the winds passed, they both fell back to the ground. Thankfully, the refrigerator didn't fall on her, and she was spared. And when all was said and done, God indeed had answered her prayer. Not even her animals died. She had goats, she had chickens, she had dogs. None of them died. She lost one chicken, but that was post-hurricane when they had to leave the island. And in the aftermath, the chicken got out and it didn't survive. But one chicken, and not during the storm. God answered her prayer. And so she's sharing with us, but here's the problem. She's still living in a house, and it looks like a mess, but it has a reason behind it. She's very neat. But she has to stack all these things carefully in her tiny house, because there's still tarps on her roof, because it still leaks, because her house is still damaged from 2017. And so she has to move stuff around, because when it rains, it leaks, and she doesn't want her stuff ruined. And if you go to her house and she tells you her story, you see buckets everywhere. She knows where every single leak is in her roof, and she has a bucket for each one. And then the UN came, like they did, and they helped the people of the island, and Sharman's one of the people they helped. And they built her a cinder block house, and they said, look at what we did, good job, all right, bye. But it was not even fit to live in. The blocks leak because they're not sealed. There is no power, there is no water, there is no septic, and it's unfinished. The floor is rough, they don't even smooth out the concrete. They threw it together, said, good job, us, popped a champagne, and went away. And so for the last 4 or 5 years, Sharman has had to look at a block house in her backyard she can't live in, and live in the house that has been ruined by a hurricane. And so she saw people's houses being fixed. She saw projects going up, and she didn't complain. She didn't whine. She just said, one day my time will come too. God will give me the house. And we're very, very close to God fulfilling that to her. So her house is almost ready. The teams before, not just us, but other teams who have gone, have built her cabinets, put together a kitchen counter. They've tiled it for her. They put her in a bathroom. They've been able to paint the walls. They stuccoed them so they're sealed inside and out. They painted the out inside. And so we finished this week by finishing up the touch-ups on the inside and painting the outside to help seal it up. Because that block has been sitting for 4 or 5 years. That wood has been sitting for 4 or 5 years, and we need to seal it up. 1, it looks good, and 2, it helps protect it. And so we began painting Sharman's house so that she would be one step closer to finally moving in. But we ran into our next hiccup at the end of that day. As we were getting closer to the end of the day, we realized, we're running out of paint. You see, Bonnie and her team had decided to bless Sharman. Instead of hoping that Sharman raises the money, you see a 5-gallon bucket of paint in Barbuda, because you have to have it shipped from Antigua, cost you 900 EC, it's East Caribbean dollars, which is the equivalent of roughly $600 US for a 5-gallon bucket of paint. They don't make enough to cover that. They barely make enough to cover their bills, and their bills are low. They're a very poor island, and Sharman said, okay, well, why if we do it 1 bucket at a time, one gallon bucket at a time? And when I raise enough and save enough, we'll put a bucket up until I can get more, and we'll do it a bucket at a time. And so God moved with the team, and they had already purchased 2 5-gallon buckets. It's a dual-color house. And we found that we miscalculated, because the house had sat for so long, that block and that wood was extremely thirsty, and it soaked up the paint faster than we can spread it. And so we needed more paint. So Bonnie and her team ordered more paint, but the way things work there, you can't just go to Lowe's and get more paint. We had to order it. They had to have somebody on Antigua pick it up for them, and we wouldn't get it till 3 p.m. the next day at earliest, because they have to put it on the ferry and it come over the ocean. And so now we need something to do, right? So it's time to pivot. We have another project to start. Now it's time to talk about Miss Vernique. Can you show me picture number 2, Miss Pam? All right, Miss Vernique. The island is a forgotten people. And Miss Vernique is the forgotten of the forgotten. She's the lowliest of the low. In fact, many people scorn her because what they would call her backwards tendencies. She's a little uneducated and she's very poor, and so even the people of Barbuda tend to shun her. But she has lived in a tiny house. This is not her house, but it is something important. I'll tell you in a minute. Her house that she finally got for her and her son is a tiny block home. It's a 2-bedroom house, and it's got a little strip the size of a hallway that serves as their living room and kitchen. There's no water. There is electricity, but even that was sketchy. But there was no water, and there is no bathroom. What you are looking at here, where this guy was helping put in water, that little shack is Miss Veronique's bathroom. When she and her son takes a shower, they have buckets in that shed that they wash themselves in. And when they need to relieve themselves, they have buckets in that shed that they relieve themselves in. They do not have a bathroom. And when she learned about Bonnie and her team years ago doing projects, and they had a list of projects doing the rebuild from Hurricane Irma, she started showing up on a regular basis. Please, I need a bathroom. Miss Bonnie, I need a bathroom, over and over. And it went on, and she was like, I don't have time to put you on the list. The list is so long already. You're just going to have to wait. We can't help. Because unfortunately, when it's a one-person thing, you're trying to help a whole island, you have to turn people away because you're not Superman. And they said, we're sorry we can't give to you, but she didn't stop. If you've ever read the book of Luke, there's a story about the parable of the persistent widow. God actually brought that to mind with Bonnie, saying, hey, don't reject her. She's doing the same thing you would do in her situation. She is being the persistent widow. And so finally they said, all right, let's go look at what your situation is and evaluate what we can or can't do. And that's when they learned her story. Miss Veronique has been living in utter poverty. And so through God's working, other teams have come, and they had to have her help. She had no septic, but she got someone to run a septic line from all the way across the street. She lives, the island, a lot of it is coral. And so you can't bust through it, right? It's harder than concrete. If you want to just have a chance to chip some of it away, you need heavy-duty jackhammer. You can't do it by hand, and her house is built on mostly that, so she can't just put a septic in. And so she had somebody say, yes, you can use ours too. And so they ran hundreds of feet of piping to make a septic for her. They also said, we need a foundation if we're going to extend off your house to build your bathroom. She got that done. And so teams have come in. They finished the concrete slab over the foundation. They framed up the bathroom. And then she had somebody running water for her. And so we started Miss Veronique's bathroom to the next stage. But we have 13 people, and a tiny little bathroom is not conducive for 13 people. So what do? Well, Bonnie said, hey, we have a lot of leftover paints from previous projects. If we're going to help Veronique, why don't we just go all out? And her tiny drab, you can tell the workers did not give a rip about making it neat. They just slapped up the concrete over the block. It did not look pretty. She said, what if we make it pretty for her? And she said, Miss Veronique, we would like to paint your house while we work on your bathroom. Is that okay? And she said, yes. And so she said, all right, what kind of paint? And she said, bright. She didn't speak well, but she could say that. She said, bright. Bright, please. And so we did, and so we painted it. And so while we were working on the bathroom, we also painted her house. And the color is, I can only describe it as Lucky Charms marshmallow green. Let me show you picture number 3. That's dim because the sun's behind us. Let me tell you, it's bright, but it changed how it looked. You go from a poor, drab concrete house to all of a sudden in this poor area, it pops with new life. And you should have seen her as we were working on her house. Her demeanor changed and her smile was radiant, and she was so excited and thankful for what was being done to her house. You see, God doesn't forget the lowliest of the low. We're all the same at the foot of the cross, and he understands that. And so she was able to be a person we were able to bless. But as we're working on this one and we just got it started, guess what? Another hiccup hit us. The thing that would become Hurricane Debbie was a tropical depression at the time with the potential for a hurricane. Remember, 3 years in a row, and it went right over the island. I'm not joking. It didn't go past north of us. No, dead over the island. Now, thankfully, we prayed and prayed, and we're like, well, we're here now, so if it turns into a hurricane, we'll batten down the hatches and ride it out. But God let it stay just a storm front. But guess what? A tropical storm front means a whole bunch of rain. Have you ever thought that you can't paint an outside of a house in rain? Yeah, we found out we shouldn't do that because as it hit, we were in the middle of painting and it started to run. So we scrambled and packed everything up. And so Wednesday came and a few of us could still work on the bathroom. We were working on the inside of it. So the rest had to find other projects, but there were things around the team home that Bonnie and Donnie could use our help with. And so we were still able to bless them and still able to work. And so Wednesday came and we were able to work through it all, even though there was heavy, heavy rains. Now, let me give you an update where we are so far in the week because something I haven't talked about was happening. This whole week was a week dedicated to prayer over one specific thing. A church in Pennsylvania had put together a container for Bonnie and her team full of supplies. There was a flatbed truck that was donated to them to haul people, haul supplies. There's a trailer attachments. There are things they needed to work, to continue working. And so they had put together a shipping container, a church in Pennsylvania, raised the donations, and got it shipped. But there were delays in the shipping. And when it finally got to Miami, thankfully they thought everything was over, and it shipped all the way to Antigua. But then when it got to Antigua, it was still in trouble. And it has been in Antigua for now 6 to 7, going on 8 weeks. It's never taken that long, but there are many varying excuses as why they can't release it. We can't get it here because of this, or our system changed it, and we lost the paperwork, and we got to refill out the paperwork. And so they were like, this never happens. And let me tell you, they wanted the container to come while we are there because we are one of the biggest teams. Actually, we are the biggest team they've ever had. Every year, we set their record. And so when you have 13 hands, many hands make light work. And they said, unfortunately, most of our teams are too small. Nothing against them. They're capable. But if we're going to unload a huge shipping container, the ideal time is when your team's here because you have so many people. And they said, will you pray with us this week that God moves and releases the container and gets it to us? And so we joined them. And so every time we prayed, whether it was for food every day, or whether it was when we started devotions, or before we began our project, every time prayer was initiated, we prayed not only over the thing we were praying for, but also the container. All day long, every day. And this brings us to Thursday. And this is where we thought God was actually going to make a miracle happen. Because if we were going to help them, this is the final day it could come out of port for everything to work, and God would still have to make a miracle for it all to fall in place because it has to leave port. It has to be put on a barge. The barge has to come over. It has to be unloaded from a barge, taken by a truck big enough to haul a container to its final destination. A crane has to be hired to lift it off the truck and put on the foundation that's been laid out for it for its permanent resting place. And then the guy who oversees shipping and goods and customs has to come break the seal. It's a lot of pieces that have to fall into place for us to be able to get to it before we leave. But it started to look like God was putting the pieces together because we found out the barge that day had a single spot. They were supposed to be full, but they had an empty spot. We could take it, and they said, it's yours if you can get it to us. We found out that finally all we needed was one more paper done. Bonnie had to sign one more form, and they were going to release it. Well, it's kind of hard when you're separated by 30, 40 miles of ocean, but we had a connection with the Caribbean helicopter company, and they said, hey, we're running some trips back and forth on the construction end of the island already, so just have your person drop it off, and on our way, you can just get it from us, sign it, and when we go back to Antigua, they can pick it back up. Perfect. God's moving, right? And so we all stop for a minute, and we all circle up and pray when we heard this is all coming together. We held hands, and we spent some time begging God, going before the throne, saying, God, it looks like everything's coming together. We're thanking you for what you're done. Help it to all work together. And then Bonnie left to go sign the documents, and we went back to work. A few hours go by, and then Bonnie comes back dejected. The person who was supposed to bring the paperwork to the helicopter never showed up. The window had been closed, and it was over. There was no way the shipping container would make it before we were able to get back. And we started wondering, look, we just prayed so hard. We just poured our hearts out. The Bible says, pray believing. We did that. And so we're like, what is going on? Church, have you ever prayed so hard before and believed in your heart that God was going to answer the prayer, but then you found out that no matter how hard you prayed, He still didn't move? That's where we found ourselves, not just us, but Bonnie's team. And that's a very hard place to be as a believer, because we want to believe Scripture and we know what it says and we want to believe in God, and it seems like God is failing us and we're like, what are you doing? But what we found out is God had a plan and he was not done speaking to us. I'll come back to that in a minute. So let's now fast forward to Saturday. We finished all our projects. The team killed it, man. They got Veronique's bathroom to where all it had to do was be taped, mudded, and then they would be able to finish out the bathroom. They hung concrete walls for the shower portion, waterproof sheetrock. They plumbed it. They framed in a window. They put in electrical. The bathroom was ready to go. They painted all over Nick's house. They finished Charmin's house. I mean, we did way more than we ever expected we were going to do. Our team really came together and rocked it out. And so what we did was we found that we're done with our project. So we earned a free half day on our very last day there. We started the day like any other. We had devotions. And then we toured the island, looked at some projects some of our past teams had worked on and other teams of Bonnie's had worked on, so we could have a better idea of what was being done on the island. We could meet some of the people that have been touched by the team. And we got to meet some other neat people and hear their stories. If you'll show me picture 4, please. This is one of the ladies, and these are her kids. And someone had donated a table to them, and we were able to deliver it and put it together and spend some time. We heard their story. Maya and Emma and Allison and Emma McSperrin, they were kid magnets, and so they were able to love on the kids. And we spent a little bit of time meeting this family, just sharing some love with them, hearing their story. And it allowed us to have a better understanding of the people of the island, their situation, the way they live, the way they think, how they make so much get done with so little, and why what we do has such an impact on their lives, because they were people of need. And so we were able to come to an appreciation. And then we went for lunch, and then we were supposed to go to the beach for another half day of just relaxation because we finished so much. But then while we were eating lunch, a fear that had begun to worry at us a little bit reared its ugly head and came to life. You see, Bonnie's team house is really close to the airport. And for the majority of the week, it had been really quiet. Usually there's planes going in and out all week long. We hadn't seen a plane. Oh no. Well, they said they're supposed to get everything together and still make it, because they, the fuel issue you heard about last week. So they told us we're going to have fuel by Saturday. So Sunday when you leave, we'll have it. We got a call Saturday during our lunch. The plane was not flying. Okay, that's fine, right? You just drive home. Oh, wait, you're 30 to 40 miles separated by ocean. There's no driving back to the airport. Well, just take the ferry. That's fine, but it's typically full. It's a rough 1.5 to 2 hour journey, and the way the schedule runs, we're going to miss our flight if we have to take the boat. We might get stuck on an island for a few more days, because if you can't fly on that little plane, if they shut that down, you're stuck. So we begin to pray, and Bonnie begins to work. And the airline said, what we'll do is we'll do this. We're going to send a helicopter. That same helicopter that was helping us with the paperwork, they said, we're going to charter them for you, but they have some other flights to do. But they said they would be willing to give you 2 flights or a 6-seater helicopter, and we'll get you over. And so they did. But we still were coming close to the end, right? Because they couldn't get there till like 11 something for the first flight, and we were supposed to leave by 2:15 on American Airlines. That's a really tight window to make it. And so we didn't know if we were going to make it in time. It came to the 11th hour, but they were able to send the helicopter. If you'll give me a picture of that, I'll give you an idea of what they flew in. That is the helicopter our team flew in. They took 2 different flights. And people were scared, right? It's scary enough to be in an airplane, but everybody hears about how dangerous helicopters were. So they're like, uh-oh, what are we getting into? It's like, well, God's covered us so far. Let's just roll with it. And so we did. And God moved and was able to make a way. And it was a close call. But we were able to board. We were almost about to miss our American Airlines flight. They had already closed the flight. We had not checked our luggage in. The system was not letting us check in. But American Airlines came through, and they rounded us up, and they skipped the line. They worked through us with our own kiosk. They got us through. They ushered us through security, and they held the plane so we can get through TSA, and we all barely made it in time. And they shut the doors, and we took off, headed for home. But here's another problem. Hurricane Debbie, which was just a storm system, has now a full-blown hurricane, and we're headed toward its eye. Thankfully, it was out in the center of the Gulf at the time, and God had opened a window that we were able to land. We were the only incoming flight into Miami when we landed. It was a ghost town of an airport. And as we were landing, they started reading off a laundry list of flights that had already been canceled due to weather, but God had left it so that ours was not canceled because our next flight wasn't until 9 p.m. Enough time for the storm to continue to move and the clouds to open, and that's what happened. In fact, when we landed and we were working our way through immigration, we looked out the window and it was just pouring buckets. The storm had hit again, but we had already made it. And then we waited it out in the terminal, and we were only a few minutes delayed, and we were finally able to take off. They had to reroute our flight because of the hurricane, but they were able to do it safely, and we landed in Charlotte, got our bags, and finally crashed in our homes and in our beds around 3:30 Sunday night, Monday morning. And it was one heck of an adventure, but it was an adventure that was filled with wrestling with God. We often balk when someone says, I'm wrestling with God on these things. But it's okay to wrestle with God. If you read the Psalms, the psalmist often wrestled with God because they couldn't figure out what God was doing because it doesn't make sense to us at many times. God says, my ways are higher than yours. My thoughts are higher than yours. And we don't like that. It feels like a cop-out. And so when we can't figure it out and God is moving and doing things and it doesn't make sense to us, we have to wrestle with that. And we found us doing the same thing all week long. So as we wrap up today, let me just share you what we learned living this life on the island, facing the tough questions that often arise in the life of a believer. You see, if I could sum up the biggest challenge for the team this week, it would be fear. Fear was the biggest thing we had to fight because there was so much uncertainty of what comes next. Now, let's be real. Fear is a real thing. Fear is a natural thing. So I'm not saying fear is bad, but giving in to fear is where you mess up. Succumbing to it is where we fail. Frank Herbert wrote the book Dune, and in his book Dune, there's a quote. It says, fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. And that rings true because when you succumb to fear, it cripples you. But here's one thing we do know. God has not given us a spirit of fear. Often in scriptures, you see the words, fear not. 2 Timothy 1:7, for God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. Now, some argue, but it also says, fear the Lord. And I would agree with you. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But the only thing we should be fearing is God himself and the ability he has to wipe us out or sustain us based on his choice. But even in that, we should rest assured because he has proven himself time and time again that he loves us and he cares for us. So yes, we should fear the ability of what God can do, but we should rest assured in who he is, what he has already done on our behalf. So that brings us back to this idea of not fearing. You see, it becomes easy to give into fear, to anxiety, to worry when things start going wrong in our lives. Things went wrong a lot on this trip. We almost missed our flight home. They were canceling flights left and right. We could have been stuck in Miami, stuck in Antigua. We could have potentially not got home till Tuesday. I'm talking about there were a lot of what ifs. But when we were faced with those things, we really only have two choices. Give in to fear or pray. That's it. I told you we're going to get back to this verse. Here it is, Philippians 4, starting in verse 6. It says, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need. That's praying. Go to him, tell him. And it says, thank him for all he has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. And this brings us back to what we were talking about earlier about reflecting on what God has done for us. You see, when we feel ourselves beginning to fear, beginning to worry, anxiety starts creeping into our lives, we should immediately pray. That's telling God what you need. But guess what? That part, it shows that you understand who God is. That all things in this world are through him and by him. That without him we would have nothing anyway. What we are doing is showing deference to the King of the universe. And so as soon as anxiety starts creeping in, as soon as fear rears its ugly head, hit your knees and pray. But then it doesn't stop there. It says after that, it says, thank him for what he has done. Why is that so important? Because when you truly are thankful and you truly consider what God has done in your life, you start to understand that even in this situation, though you can't make sense of it, time and time again, God has proven himself to be a God who takes care of you. And so though you can't figure it out now, you can trust he can stay consistent to who he has been. He has already provided for you in the past. He has already protected you. And if you just think solely about our salvation alone, that should be enough. That should be sufficient for us to rest assured in who he is. You see, the Bible is clear that God is sovereign and God is in control. The Gospels themselves show us that the storms, the winds, and the waves obey his very command. And so when we can't figure it out, what we need to come to terms with is, it doesn't matter, because he does. He knows. And that's really hard to come to terms with. I get it, especially if you're a person prone to anxiety, a person who likes to plan, who likes to schedule, who likes to be in control. But the truth is, that's more of an illusion than we realize. For instance, when you fly, you're not in control. You're in the pilot's hands. Your schedule, you can't control it. If you get delayed, that's it. That's all there is to it, folks. You're in the air in a flying tube and you just ride it out. That's what life is for us. We just don't realize it. But when we truly in gratitude thank God for what he has done, we reflect on his movement in our lives, then we begin to see more and more how good he is, how caring he is, and how loving he is. And it allows us to begin to learn to lean more and more into his promises. Isaiah 40, starting verse 28 says, "Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the whole earth. He never becomes faint or weary. There is no limit to his understanding. He gives strength to the faint and strengthens the powerless." You see, there is confidence that comes from trusting in God, from leaning on the knowledge of who he is and what he has already done. And it allows people to approach the most uncertain times in their life, like the men in Daniel chapter 3. You see, in Daniel 3, we see the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they were told if they did not bow down to and worship this idol, they would be killed. And when the king found out they didn't follow commands, he gave them one last chance. He said, "I need you to understand, if you don't worship this idol, I have a fiery furnace I'm going to put you into." But these guys knew God. They knew his protection and his provision, and they were able to answer the king like this. Daniel 3, starting verse 17, they said, "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God who we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." You see, they had a faith in God's ability to save them, but they had no certainty that he would. And that's the profound part of the reply when they said, "even if he doesn't." We don't often think like that. We're like, "Oh yeah, God can save me." And then when he doesn't, we don't know how to handle it. These guys walked in knowing he could choose not to. And they said, "even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down to this idol." Because they understood that God was so great that he should be worshiped, that he should be honored, he should be obeyed. Whether or not we can see what's working in our lives, they said he still deserves the praise. Because they understand who he was. They understood what he had done for them. And that should be the same for us. We should understand who he is. We should be able to trust in his how, even if we can't make sense of it. You see, Bonnie asked a question when things started falling apart. She said, "Why would God give me false hope?" Because we thought God was coming through on that day when it looked like the shipping container was going to fall into place. And we prayed with certainty. And she looked at me and she said, "He's not a God of false hope. So why did I have false hope?" But what we learned in all this was that there are many plans of man, but it's God's will that prevails. You see, he is sovereign. He knows what is best. And if we think he has failed, it is instead our own lack of understanding. It is our lack of trusting in God where we failed, not him. And so I ask you today as we close, do you really trust God? Because if you can truthfully answer yes to that question, then even when life doesn't make sense, you can trust that he is still in control, that he is still good, and that he is still loving. Let's pray. God, we thank you so much how you show yourself time and time again. In the most uncertain times of our lives, when things don't seem to be working out, when fear has a chance to raise its ugly head and cripple us, you said, "Be still and know that I am God." hard to do, God. We are people who like to be in control. We like to know what's coming. And it's hard for us to walk in blind faith sometimes. But I pray that we be a church filled with such faith in who you are and such faith in your protection and your provision, that when the certain times of life hit us, we can approach them like the men in Daniel 3 and said, even if he doesn't, I will still serve him. Even if he doesn't seem to come through, I will still praise him. That our faith will not waver because we know who you are. And even if we can't make sense of it, we know that you know what's going on. You are not out of control and you have a plan, and we can trust in that plan. God, help us today, because anxiety is a real part of life. Many of us battle it day in and day out. But you are the God who can free us from those chains. You are the God who can give us the peace we need. That's what Philippians 4 tells us, that if we do all these things, then it says, then you will give us the peace that goes past any human understanding. But that can only come from you. So God, help us be a people of faith so that we can be a people of peace. We love you, God. We're so thankful for how you've shown yourself day in and day out. Let us be more and more aware of your moving in our daily lives, because the more we focus on that, the more thankful our hearts become. Let us truly show you the glory, the honor, the reverence that you deserve. To forget about me, but focus on you instead. God, we praise you for your mighty works. And it's in your Son's precious and holy name we pray. Amen.